Welcome to Beyond Expertise, the podcast about what happens when the career identity you've built no longer contains all of who you are, and how you begin making room for what comes next. I'm your host, Eric Dickmann. My guest today is Christian Hurst, a longtime creative professional and the author of the Lily Starling science fiction series. What stayed with me from our conversation is that Christian's story is not built around walking away from a successful career. He still enjoys his work. He has built real expertise as a designer and creative leader. But he also reached a point where creating for someone else's agenda was no longer enough. I think that distinction matters. We often talk about reinvention as though it requires a dramatic break, leaving the company, starting the business, or abandoning one identity in favor of another. Christian's experience offers a different model. Sometimes the next chapter begins alongside the life you already have. For him, that meant taking stories that had lived in his imagination for more than 20 years and finally deciding they could not remain there forever. He wrote a novel, self-published it, put it in front of readers, and learned as he went. The process was imperfect. He later brought in editors, worked with the small publisher, and became more deliberate about the craft. But none of that could have happened until he was willing to release something before it felt completely ready. That may be the lesson I took most clearly from Christian. Expertise can give us confidence, but it also makes us overly aware of everything that could be improved. At some point, creating requires us to stop protecting the idea and give it life outside of our own heads. His story is also a reminder that the work we do for our employers and clients may build the very skills we eventually use to create something deeply personal. Christian's career in design taught him how to develop ideas, present them professionally, absorb criticism, and keep producing. Those skills became the foundation for work that now carries his own name. In our conversation, we talk about creative identity, the loneliness of feeling different, the stories that help us understand ourselves, and what it takes to move a long-held ambition from imagination into the world. Let's get ready to go beyond expertise. Christian, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you could join me today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
One of the things that I do with all my guests is I like to turn back the dial of time a little bit and think about when you were younger, graduating from high school, getting ready to take that first real career job or go on to additional schooling. At that point in your life, what is it that you thought you wanted to do?
Well, it's interesting. I've always had an interest in art and creativity. And so from a young age, I always said that I was going to be an artist when I grew up. But that turned out to encompass so many different things because creativity is more of a mindset, I guess, than any sort of one field. And so when I was going into college, I really was considering multiple creative fields. And I did a little film school. I did a little media studies. But I ended up picking graphic design, which was something I loved anyway. I had experience since I was like 16 doing graphic design and had an internship when I was a teenager. So that was, I knew I had to focus.
Yeah.
and I was like, that's a good focus because I know I'm good at it and I know I can, at least get a job.
Well, that's interesting. If you had a couple different creative outlets that you enjoyed and were thinking about pursuing, did graphic design just rise to the top because it seemed like there was the most opportunity in that field, because somebody said, hey, you're really good at this, or because you were most passionate about it? How did you end up really settling on that?
Yes, it's a bit of all of those. I was actually in a bookstore, believe it or not. I remember clearly I was on break between semesters and I was at Barnes and Noble and I was like looking at books on graphic design, not career-wise. I was just doing that for enjoyment. And as I was looking through one of the books, I was like, I really should just change my major to this because I'm enough of a nerd about it that I know that I could have a successful career in this. And when you're young, I mean, I don't know if I assume it's this way for everybody. You kind of, your opportunities are endless. At least for me, I didn't like narrow myself to any one particular endpoint as far as a career goes. And it was just more that I wanted to make cool stuff. And so I thought this is a way that I can get on that immediately. And it's actually turned out to be my superpower throughout all the other like creative efforts that I've gone and done, because once you know design and design thinking and how to use the tools, you can make anything look professional, which is really a big value.
Yeah. And so did you know it was a superpower back then? And looking back at those first jobs that you got, did it feel
No,
like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to make my life's work?
well, no, not a superpower. I think I felt like I was very serious about it back then. I was very like academic, very like, I'm going to be one of those designers who like gives TED Talks about, fonts and stuff. So, um, but which is good, I think, because I learned very granular things about design that have, served me to this day. But especially now with like AI making people, it's another wave of people thinking they can be designers. Uh, and I've survived that before, when PowerPoint first proliferated and when many other, times when tools became very accessible to people and they would play, which is fine. I love it when people play, but then they realize that all their stuff looks like a mess and then they hire a graphic designer to fix it. So
Yep.
we just have to survive those little moments.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So many changes. Yeah. I think about just all the technology changes that have probably happened in your career. I know certainly in
Yeah.
mine, and it's a lot to keep track of. So you're now working as a graphic designer. Talk a little bit about how your career progressed and what were
Yeah.
you really feeling about it?
So I am a millennial and I entered the workforce during the financial crisis and like a lot of people my age. So I actually did, my career was kind of the reverse of a lot of people's. I did freelance first. Um, and the reason for that was because a lot of agencies had laid people off and they had too much work. And so there was a lot of overflow work. So um, I lived in the Pittsburgh area and I made relationships with some Pittsburgh agencies and then also some agencies in New York, some big ones. Got a lot of work that way. And then when the economy recovered, it all went away.
Mm.
And because they hired people again. So that was the point where I was like, I guess I got to get a real job and ended up moving to the DC area. And, I tell people actually, this is advice, but you don't have to take it, obviously, take all advice with a grain of salt. But when I was thinking, I want a job that will pay the bills, and I want a career in this, I really want to build a career. Once I made that decision, me and my wife made a list of like cities in the country that we would be comfortable living in. We were like, we could live in these places. And then which of those places have strong, careers in graphic design. And then I started applying for jobs in those places and we ended up in DC.
Did you still feel like as you're working your way up the corporate ladder, back in the corporate world now, did you still feel like that creative itch was being scratched? Where in your career progression did you decide that maybe graphic design isn't everything, isn't enough? There's another itch I need to scratch.
Yeah, so I've always seen myself as a storyteller, and I think graphic design is one expression of that. So I see it as a continuous creative career. As far as the itch being scratched, I'm very like I get involved in multiple projects, so I'm always doing things, even off on the side, or like sitting on the train and writing, and so yeah, for a long time I was very busy, obviously building my career. Kind of have to go where it goes, especially in the time I came up. And so I did hop around companies a little bit, really got kind of my legit footing when I was at Marriott, and I was there for the Starwood merger. I was there for the creation of Bonvoy, the brand. And so I worked on a lot of their hotel brands. and worked with a lot of big agencies then. So I I had a period where I hopped back to a creative agency in Baltimore for a while, and then I went back to Marriott. And um, there was a point where I remember I was sitting in an Uber going home, and it was a long ride, and I can't remember exactly why it hit me then. I think I was on my laptop sending some emails and like doing some work, and I'm like commuting and not really thinking about it. And I was like, oh, I think that I'm legit now. Like, I think that I don't have to like fake it anymore. I'm actually doing this work and it's coming naturally to me. And that was like a moment for me where I realized that you can develop that muscle where you're not scared of where the next idea is going to come from anymore. You are just sort of producing work almost in the way that you would personally. So as an artist, I go and I create and I don't really worry about what consumers think about it. And I think I reached that place in my career where it was like, oh, I can put stuff out there now and I'm not like a wreck about it, and it takes like the first few times that you put your work out there and like a million people see it and then they forget about it the next day. Yeah. And it's just a process, and even if it was their favorite thing in the world and they forget about it the next day,
Yep.
you move on. And so it helps you feel better about when the work maybe isn't as good. You just do it again.
Well, I know when I talk to a lot of guests on this show, many of them reach a point in their career where they've developed a lot of skill and expertise, very much what you're talking about. They're comfortable in their roles. They have truly become experts in what they do. But there's something that feels like it's unfulfilled, that they're looking for that next thing, that second chapter, either applying some of those skills maybe in a different way, maybe moving out of the corporate world and doing freelance work, consulting, whatever it may be. But you strike me as having a slightly different story, that you're continuing in the corporate world. That's not really a problem. But there's also this other side of you where you have stories to tell. And maybe it would be good to understand a little bit about your backstory there. I know you came from a religious background, and that's certainly given you things to think about and discuss, right? How did you decide that you have stories that you want to tell?
Yeah, I think that's a good transition because it was at, this point, then I'm like well on my career and then COVID hits. And so it just sort of shakes you up and it shook up the world and it causes you to think about your life differently just because I had to sort of pivot and like at that point in my life, I was not ready to pivot. I did not want to pivot, but yeah. I was forced to pivot at that point. And I'm glad where I ended up. And I'll just say about AARP that it's been a wonderful experience. And I absolutely love the people over there and the culture and working there. But from a very young age, I've had, stories to tell. And I think part of that is because, like you said, I grew up in the Mormon church, and growing up in an environment like that where there are very set expectations for your life, your entire life, right? And that's just very contrary to my personality. So from a young age, I felt a little bit like an outsider. I was a weird kid. I liked being a weird kid. That wasn't a problem. I love my parents, and they were great parents. But the environment of the church was not a good match for my personality. So a long time I had kind of the mask I wore at church, and then like who I really was inside. And that kind of gets lonely, right? Because you start to build your identity from the inside out, and you start to feel like you're always on the outside looking in. Yeah. I think that can be a good perspective for an artist because you observe people and you see the things they do and the way they interact, and from almost a detached perspective. But at the same time, it can get very lonely. And so that, for me, as someone who was able to work through that and grow and be true to themselves and find a good place, it was important for me to kind of pass that lesson on to younger people and tell that in a story format. Because for me growing up, stories were my refuge. I would, lose myself in books and in science fiction, and I would explore these whole worlds in my mind, and it kind of saved me from the going nuts.
Yeah. Was there a particular series that you were drawn to as a younger person? What was it about science fiction that really drew you in? Just the different worlds?
Absolutely. I mean, I grew up on the classics. We're a well-read family. My parents still have like rooms, walls and walls of books. And so I grew up reading a lot, but I also grew up watching Star Trek, and Star Trek was a big influence on my life. From the time I was quite young, I watched the original show, and then ended up being a fan of all of it later. But those early shows are the blend of fun and also just very like philosophical, deep thinking, and that reached me at a young age because I enjoyed the action adventure, I enjoyed the fun, I enjoyed the like moral decision making of Captain Kirk, who would walk in a room and he always knew what he was going to do. Nobody ever told him what to do, right? And that really appealed to me as a kid, because he was sure of himself, but he was sure of himself in like a moral sense. It was very much internal and not like what people had, told him to do. And
For sure.
And then the class. I mean, like, I think the book that changed my life was actually Les Miserables, which is not sci-fi. But when I was 14, I read that book from cover to cover, which isn't normal, I've heard, for 14-year-olds. But but I remember my mom would get mad at me because I would want to sit in the back seat of the car when we would drive to like different places, and she's like, "I'm not your chauffeur," or whatever. She thought it was weird that I sat in the back seat, and I'm like, "I just want to sit back here and read." And and I read that whole book, and I learned, I couldn't really put words to it at the time, but like Victor Hugo and then later Ursula Le Guin, who is another one of my favorites, talk a lot about the dangers of absolutism. And, I think it just really hit me because I would see people as a kid at church get up and talk about how I know this to be true, or I know this, or I know that, or I know that this is going to happen. I know that my life is going to do this. And then inevitably something would happen to make them doubt, right? To pull the rug out from under them. And it wasn't just a crisis of faith. It was a crisis of identity. And that really hit me because it's like you formed your entire sense of being around what the church told you to be. And so when just a little thing happens to like make you doubt, you don't know who you are anymore. And that was a very scary thing to me. And so I think I was very drawn to lessons like that.
It's interesting. And I know in talking with others that many people have a book idea in their head. Maybe it's something that's existed for years or decades, a thought about, oh, this would make a good story. Some have even gone so far as to pull out a notebook and sketch characters and scenes like that. And so I think for a lot of people in their second act, writing a book is something that's on the table. Maybe it's a business book, not a work of fiction, but they think about being an author. And there's a pretty big jump from taking a few ideas scratched in a notebook to putting together a coherent story or a book. So I'm interested in that process for you. You've decided now that you want to write a book. You've got some ideas about a story that you want to tell. How then do you take these out of your mind and start to put it into a book that somebody would enjoy reading?
Yeah, I think that there was that point when I was like, if I don't tell these stories now, I'm never going to get to, right? So I need to stop sort of waiting for the perfect time or whatever. But a lot of them have been in the making for 20 some years, like you said, like just rattling around in my head, or I've written about them, sketched them out. I wrote film script, like screenplay drafts at some point. I made a video games when I was younger, and so I've explored comic books. I've drawn comic books. So I've explored these ideas in many different ways. And so finally I was like, a novel. I don't know if I can write a novel, but I'm going to try. and because I've read a lot, and so it's funny because when people review my work, they're like, "There's almost something classical about it." I'm like, "That's probably because I read mostly classics, and I haven't read a lot of like contemporary YA fiction. To be honest, I've read some, but not a ton. And I'm not a huge fan of the first person. Like when I read a book, if it's entirely in the first person, it can get tedious for me. So yeah, my work feels a little more classical, and that's just the way I write. But I think I think what happened is this entire creative career, like we were talking about before, just taught me to be able to pull the trigger on things. And so I wrote this book, and then I was like, I'm gonna self-publish it. Boom. And I just put it out into the world. And I wasn't sure what to expect. I had a lot of other ideas for things I wanted to write. This was the first novel that I wrote. And I was like, I have this idea for a romantic comedy. I have this idea for a whole thing about like Mormon missionaries. I have a story about that. I have like all these different ideas of things, and I wasn't really sure where this was going to go. And then people started to read it, and people started to like it, and people started to comment on it. And I was like, I should start taking this seriously. And so I actually had the book edited at that point because people kept finding mistakes in it. And I was a little bit like, oh, I should really be a little more
intentional about it.
Intentional about my work. Yeah, exactly. And I ended up working with a small publisher in Pittsburgh, Outpost Books, and they've been awesome to just get me in touch with some things that I needed. And but I still maintain all the creative control over my own work and work on my own, covers and everything.
Well, I'm curious, as you're writing this, the story is coming to life. You're putting it, we'd say on paper, but it's in a computer, right? So you're putting all this down. Are you letting somebody read it as you go? Did you let your wife take a look at it? Did you wait until the entire thing was done and then drop a manuscript kind of down on somebody's desk and say, read it and tell me what you think? How do you get that first feedback?
I didn't. For the first one, I just published it.
Oh,
that I was.
Nobody
no
had
one
read
had.
it.
Yeah, no one had. There were some people who bought it over Christmas. They were the first people who had read it besides me. Yeah, and I got those first reviews, and I was like, oh wow, people connect to this, and so it was, for me, it felt very personal, and it felt like I felt like it might be something people would connect to because there are a lot of ideas in there that I feel are universal, like loneliness and connection and identity. And I also thought that people would connect maybe to the queer characters because a lot of sci-fi has queer characters, but it always has to be a part of the story. It's like this character, is trans and we're going to have a whole episode about it instead of like, I just wanted these people to exist in their queer identities within the story. And it doesn't necessarily move the plot along. It's part of who they are. And people did like that. People liked that. People liked my characterization, and they felt like I've gotten feedback that like the dialogue and the characters feel real to them. So I was like, okay, well then I'm writing book number 2 because I already had the whole idea for book number 2 in my head, and that was really when I started to be a lot more intentional about it.
How did you get those first people to read the book? So you talked self-publishing. Did you put it on a website? Did you upload it into Amazon or Apple Books? Or how did those first people find it?
Yeah, I put it on Draft to Digital, which is an aggregator. It's a tool that a lot of authors use. So I did a little homework, and I knew a little bit about the publishing world, but not so much about the self-publishing world. And so I put it out there, and they have a couple tools like for promoting your book and stuff. So people just found it because it was Christmas time and there was a lot of buying, and I just put it down to 99 cents, and it popped up on a lot of sites as like new. Yeah. And people like the cover kind of thing. So, but the title too, I thought was sort of an enigmatic and fun, like Lily Starling and the Voyage of the Salamander. It sounds pulpy and weird, and you want to check it out, So I made that sort of part of the identity of the book.
I'm interested too to understand your experience with an editor. You said a couple people flagged some mistakes. What does an editor really provide to you? It's more than just, hey, there's a typo here or something like that. They're
Yeah.
looking at it for the story, right? Does everything make sense? Are things connected? Did you leave dead ends? That sort
Well,
of
there's
thing.
different types of editors. So there are copy editors and then there's story editors. So I've worked with both now, and both are helpful. I think I talk about my relationship with the story editor as if I'm locked in Mortal Kombat because you kind of like, it's a back and forth of like, uh, you know, they do want you to change things to be generally more audience appealing, commercially viable kind of things, especially
Sure.
if they work for your publisher. But I'm usually kind of uh, stubborn about keeping things the way that I, saw them in the book, and so I have had some criticism of my work in terms of like plotting, and they're like, well, it really kind of slows down at this point. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I did that on purpose. You don't have to like it. but so I've never really written them to be the most commercially successful books. That was never my intention with this particular series, but more to be just true to what they are. And that was really what it was all about when I was publishing it. It sounds kind of like cheesy, but it's true. Like I've done all this creative work. I've made millions of assets throughout my career, right? I want something that exists that when you look it up, it has my name on it. That's some work that I put my heart and soul into that you can find when you Google me,
Yes.
And that was important to me.
Now, we'll assume your employer's not listening, but can you see becoming a full-time author?
I could see it. I mean, I think the finances of being an author are very tricky,
Sure.
frankly, even if you're published through one of the big five. Most authors are not full-time authors. A lot of them are full-time writers, but they have to write for, publications and
Sure.
A lot of times do like corporate writing and stuff to, make a living. So, obviously that would be wonderful because the more I can make like financially with my writing, the more I can write. So that's kind of the goal, is for it to be self-sustaining. But I don't know. Yeah, of course I would love that, but I would be happy either way.
Well, I hear from a lot of people that, when they're working in these corporate environments, I've certainly experienced this myself. It's somebody else's agenda, right? You're working on the projects that
Yeah.
they need. You talked about the merger with Starwood and the rebranding and new hotels. They seem to come up with a new hotel every week, but that's not your agenda, right? That's somebody else's agenda. And even though it might be fun working on it, I do think a lot of people get to a point in their career where they said, well, I kind of want to do my agenda now. I kind of work on the things that are most important to me. Not that work was bad. It's just wasn't the work that rises to the top of your list of things that are satisfying.
Absolutely. And so for someone like me, who's a creative person, who's had a lot of like 20 years of pent up storytelling, I have so many ideas that like, that's my problem, is I don't get writer's block. I just have too much that I want to. If you read the first book of the series, it's got like each chapter is almost like an episode of television. It's really crammed in there. There's a lot of different adventures. And then the second book, I kind of let it breathe a little more. It's more like a movie, where it's one overarching plot. But so yeah, I have a lot to tell.
Maybe we'll see this turned into a TV show. I know Apple TV has become a great place for sci-fi programs.
There are a lot of good ones. Yeah, I'd love to see that. That would be neat someday. After the YA series is done, which will be 5 books, I have another series planned in this universe, 5 books that are going to be a little more adult sci-fi. So
very nice. Well, what advice would you give to somebody who maybe is similar in career stage to what you are, has some ideas that have been percolating in their brain for a long time, think that they want to start writing a book? Any advice?
Yes,
One writer to another?
I always tell people just to keep creating. If something doesn't work, make something new. But you have to get something on the wall to look at in order to refine it. It can't stay inside forever. You have to throw it out there, mess with it, see if it works, iterate, or move on. And sometimes, that's the best thing to do is to do a new version. But that's the best way not to overwork something. I think you just keep creating, keep going. Don't. You will get discouraged. Make yourself make something every day, and you'll get out of it.
Are you one of these writers that says, I have to write X number of words every day or a week, just to get the book done?
No, but I do make myself do something creative every day.
Well, it sounds fascinating. Where can people find out more about your series? Where can they download these books to read them and stay tuned for your next series?
Yeah, you can check out all my work at churstpublishing.com or lilystarlingbook.com. The first book in the series just won an Ippy Award. It won gold at the Ippies, which is a great honor.
Well,
and the
congratulations.
Thank you. And the audiobook just came out. So a lot of people who are busy get the audiobook. It's wonderful. Aaron Mello Pryor, the actor, did the voice work for it, and it's just absolutely fabulous. They elevated it to a level I didn't even think was possible. So go check that out. You can find me on Instagram at Hurst Publishing, or just Google me. You'll find me.
Perfect. That's great. I'll make sure we have all that linked up in the show notes so that people can find you. Christian, this fascinating discussion. Congratulations on the book. I'll make sure to check them out myself, but I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Beyond Expertise. You can find show notes, resources, and links mentioned during this episode at podcast.ericdickmann.com. If this conversation resonated with you, I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue exploring what it means to reinvent ourselves beyond our careers, titles, and expertise.